it's Robin Riley for Bello's Designs. Welcome and thanks for joining me in this Let's Talk Crafty to Me video tutorial. I am calling this tutorial Adding Creativity to Your Envelopes. Before we get started though, I would like to invite you to join us on our Facebook pages. We have two of them. One is the Bello's Design Lounge, where we showcase all of our Lavinia creations with Lavinia stamps and stencils. And our other page is called Bello's Designs a la carte, and that's where we focus on Sweet Poppy supplies, cardio, Nellie's Choice, That's Crafty, and more. So please join us on both of those pages and see all the goodness that's there, share your creations, and just have a good time. So today's I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm doing 3 separate projects, basically 3 separate sizes of envelopes. I'm going to introduce the supplies as I do each project. Main reason is because yours is going to be different than mine. You will use things in your stash. This is just to give you kind of a basic idea on how to get creative with a plain envelope. Some of the basic tools though that we will be needing will be acrylic blocks in various sizes, and that will depend on the stamps that you're using. You are going to need some type of glue. Mine's pretty old. Look at that cracked bottle. This is an Art Glitter Designer Dries Clear Adhesive, my absolute favorite glue. You may need scissors for trimming. We're going to need various types of ink. Again, I'll explain the inks that I'm using when we get to each project. You'll need blending brushes or some type of tool to apply to your stamps and stencils. This is another tool that we'll be using. This is called the Ranger's Distress Glaze. This is a nice thing to have in your stash. What it does is it puts a very fine glaze on your artwork that is on the outside of your envelope. That way, if any weather, be it water, snowflakes, touch it, it won't bleed and smudge. This is just a nice thing to protect the outside of that envelope, and you use so very little. I have a feeling this bottle will dry out way before I ever get to use all of it. All right, let's get started. Okay, let's take a look at the first card. Now, this is something that I created a while ago during the month of December. But I thought it would be great using cards that I've already made. And if you're like me, you make these cards and you keep them in a stash, and then when you need one, you pull it out. That's when it's fun to create the envelope. So using something that's already been created, let's make an envelope that's going to match. And how I do that is I look at my card and I try to find a few elements that I would like to highlight on the envelope itself. So it's pretty obvious what I've done here. Being that these nice trees are on the card, I'm going to replicate that onto the card front. For the lining of my card, I looked around and finally noticed the teardrop shapes, and it reminded me of the Lavinia stencil. So that's what I will use to create the inside piece. All right, let's get started, and I'll try to explain to you my process. So that was a rather large card, probably the largest card that I ever make. And it fits inside a 6x6 envelope. Now you have to cut a piece of copy paper, something very thin, to fit on the inside. You don't want a thick piece of paper because number one, it'll be hard to get a nice crease when you fold the flap over. And number two, you don't want to add any more additional weight to the card itself when you go to mail. You don't want to have to pay extra postage if you don't need to. So the insert that I'll be using for a 6x6 envelope measures 5.5 inches by 7.25 inches. And the way I have come up with my measurements for this is typically I take approximately 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch off of the width of my card envelope. So the envelope being 6 inches wide, I took off a 1/2 inch. So that's how I got the 5.5 inch measurement. Now, the next part can be a little bit tricky, mainly because of the shape of the flap. Some flaps are rounded, some are extremely straight. So that's going to vary from envelope to envelope. But a good rule of thumb for me is I place my insert piece on the back of my envelope near the bottom, and I measure from the bottom to the sticky part. And I drop down about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch from there, because I want to be able to still use the adhesive part of the envelope. Sorry, I was out of focus there, out of shot. All right, so let's get started, and I'll show you some tips and tricks for creating. So the first one that we're doing, let's take a quick peek at it again. I will be doing the trees on the outside with the pretty stenciled insert. I'm going to start with the insert. Using that copy paper and the feathered leaf stencil from Lavinia. Keep in mind, the only part that you're going to see is probably only the upper 1/4 of this piece of insert paper. So there's no need to stencil the entire piece of the insert. I like to just place it randomly, no rhyme, no reason, and using Distress ink in aged mahogany, and that is the same color I used when I created the card. I would take a blending brush and apply ink, not worrying about smoothness or blotchiness. I'm just going to do a quick application, keeping in mind I need not fill the entire piece of insert paper. I try to always ink at least 1/3 of the way down, maybe a little bit more. That way it gives me a little bit of room to play. That should be sufficient. I set that aside. All right, that's good enough. Opening my envelope, I will insert this all the way to the bottom of the envelope, making sure that it's even. Sometimes the paper gets hung up down there at the bottom of the envelope, so you might have to play with the paper a little bit. All right, so I can see that I do not have to trim anything additionally. I am still under that adhesive part of the envelope. So what I do now, I want to get a nice crease so that when I fold the flap, it doesn't bunch up here. So what I do is I put a fingernail on that crease and fold up just a little bit to start. And then I fold everything over, and just using my finger, you could use a bone folder if you wanted, it's not necessary. Lift up the flap. Keep everything in place. And this is the piece, the only piece where you need to add glue. You do not want to glue the entire insert. If you did that, I will guarantee you, you will not have a nice crease when you go to fold. Somehow it bunches up and it makes a mess of everything. So just folding that over and pressing. And there's my insert. Something that simple. Flipping over to decorate the front. I always open the flap completely. I just get in that habit, because if not, and I were to try to stamp or decorate, there's actually a little more thickness because of that flap there, and I wouldn't get a nice even stamp or stencil. So on this card, I'm going to just be using the same tree, or on this envelope, I'm sorry, I'm using the same tree I used on the card, which is a Sweet Poppy Winter Scene stencil. I'm not going to use the magnetic sheet. I don't feel it's necessary for me to do that. Main reason because this is just such a quick process. So laying this down, positioning it where I would like the tree, keeping in mind that I need to have space for the return address and space for the addressee. I am using Distress Oxide pine needles, which is the same color I did the tree on the card. And I'm going to simply stencil the ink onto the tree. I'll add a little bit more interest by adding the snowbank. All right, there's the one tree, and I am going to add the next tree, the smaller tree. Now, you could take your time and add a piece of tape here and across the top if you're concerned about hitting that envelope, but for the sake of time, I'm going to try to be careful and do this the best I can. All right, my stencil will get cleaned quickly. Now, there's the outside of my envelope. I have room for the return address. I have room to address it. The last thing I'm going to do is add some clear glitter, which is with a Sakura Jelly Roll pen. And you know, this is, all I know is it's clear. I've seen names before, but this particular pen does not have a name on it. So I think if you just look around, you'll be able to find just the clear one. So I'm just going to add a few highlights here and there to the tree just to give it some interest. Make it replicate that card. All right, you get the idea here. You don't need to watch me add all the squiggles and whatnot, but you see what I mean, how easy this is to add interest to an envelope. And I think your recipient will be pleased that you took a little extra time to do that also. So let's grab that card and I'll show you how nicely it will fit in with that insert piece. So it's just a nice way to send a card to friends and family. All right, let's look at another size card. This is more your typical A6 size card. Okay, this is the card. This is the envelope. Again, something that I made a while ago, which I'm sure you have that stash. Pull some out. And we'll take some elements from here to decorate the front and the inside of the card. The envelope, like I said, is an A6 envelope, which measures 6.5 inches by 4 3/4 inches. The insert that is needed is a piece of copy paper that measures 6 1/4 by 6 1/4 inches. And again, I used the same method for measuring, laying out my paper, removing 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch off of the sides, measuring the length just so I get underneath the adhesive part of this card. And this one is a self-adhesive. All right, let's get started on this one. So with this one, yes, I misplaced the piece of paper. All right, for the sake of time, what I will do is I will use the insert, so you don't have to sit here and watch me cut the paper. I'll use the insert that had the markings on it. Excuse me for that. The inside of this card, I want to use the background that I created, the snowflakes. And how I did that is I used Distressed Oxide Antique Linen ink along with the Sweet Poppy ornate snow globe stencil. Again, I will not be using a magnetic sheet for this. You could if you wanted to. I'm just trying to save time here. So just placing some of the snowflakes onto the insert piece, I will randomly stencil over those, and I get a very light, subtle snowflake appearance. Moving the stencil, staying away from the edge here because I don't want that to appear. I will continue to rotate and add snowflakes about a third of the way down this piece. I like using stencils in different ways, not always the way that they were meant to be used. Even though this is a gorgeous stencil, there are just other ways that you can utilize bits and pieces. So look at your stash, see what you have, and see what other ways you could actually be using these stencils. Get more use out of it, get more bang for your buck, right? All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there. Again, I'll demonstrate how to place this in the envelope. I want to make sure that we get all the way to the bottom. All right, that's pretty close. I want to try to get this in here as evenly as possible. I don't want it to be cockeyed. Now, using my fingernail, I'm going to hold it near the flap crease, just pressing on my nail to get it started, then finishing it off, adding glue only to the inside of that top flap. And there we go, a nice insert piece. Let me do a quick wipe up of my surface because I know what'll happen if I don't. All right, now for the front of this card, what I want to use, I will replicate this image right here with the exception that I'm going to have the bird looking the other direction. Now, the stamps that I'll be using are the seasonal branches from Cardio. Placing that on an acrylic block, I am using the Distress Oxide pine needles. Again, this matches my card. And I'm going to just randomly place a few of these branches. Whoops, another one decided to come along. I like stamping with Oxide ink sometimes because it just gives you a whole nother look. Kind of washed out, somewhat artsy, I think. I like that. Almost a watercolor effect. All right, just a few more. Move that ink out of the way. Wash off my stamp quickly, and I'm going to add the bird. Now, the stamp set is also a Cardio stamp set. It's called Thorny Wreath. Comes with a lot of nice thorny pieces of branch that you can create your own wreath with. You get some leaves, nice ferns, and two birds, one looking left, one looking right. And I'm going to use the one looking right this time, just to make it a little opposite of what the original card was. I am using a small acrylic block here. along with VersaFine Clair Nocturne for the stamping. I'm going to place him sitting on a branch. There he is. Now what I did to add a little more interest to the bird is I used some colored pencils, a dark red and a warm gray color. And I'm just going to add some color to those highlighted areas. Again, just for a little more interest. And I've got something about birds with white eyes. I don't like that look, so I always tend to color that in a little bit. All right, so as you can see, I have room for the return address, for the addressee, and the card will slide in there very easily. So a nice way to present a card either through the mail or by giving it to someone by hand. This is the last card I'm going to demonstrate. This is a 5x5 card that I made a long time ago actually. And now I want to send it to someone. So I want to create a decorative envelope. So to do that, I look and find the elements that I want to use. And I thought the stars would be great for the insert, and the branch would be awesome on the outside of the card. So for a 5x5 envelope, or I'm sorry, it's a 5x5 card, I use a 5.5 by 5.5 envelope. And the insert will measure 5.25 by 6.5, again on copy paper. And again, I misplaced my piece of paper, so I'm just going to use this as the insert. That's where we'll start. For the insert, I used the Lavinia 211 Stars #1, which is considered a pound stamp. VersaFine Clair Summertime. Using a small acrylic block, I will randomly press the stars, first, second generation, keeping in mind I do not need to stamp the entire piece of paper. Just about a third of the way down should be sufficient. All right, that should do it. Inserting this into the card. Making sure that it's as centered as possible. It's below the adhesive. Using my nail to begin the crease, pressing, and only gluing the top portion of the insert. You know, I love this glue, but this pin sometimes is tough to get in there. Okay, there we go. Now, let's decorate the front quickly for you. I will be using Lavinia stamps, and this set is called the Berry Wreath stamp. Comes with 2 pieces of a wreath and some berries. This is LAV 568. Using an acrylic block, and I will be using VersaFine Clair in Twilight. All right, I'm going to start out in the corner with a full piece of this wreath. I'm not too concerned about that being not perfectly stamped. It's fine. I think it kind of gives character when that happens, especially using these. I'm going to add another one here just to demonstrate that it doesn't matter where you put this as long as you leave the appropriate amount of room for your address. that before I have an accident. And I'm going to add one more small section here to the top. You could just continue on doing second generations if you wanted. Now I'm going to add a little more interest by coloring just a few of these berries. And I'm using a cheap watercolor marker. You could use whatever you wanted. You could use watercolor pencils. You could use a regular colored pencil. It doesn't matter. And I'm just randomly adding some color to create some more interest. I think, knowing that most of us are card makers, you know, as well as I know, that if you add thicker embellishments, it will naturally change the price of the postage. So when doing this, I try to keep it as flat as possible. All right, let's just add a few more orange berries. All right, and then that card very simply and easily will go inside and be a beautiful card for someone to receive. Plenty of room to add the addresses and the return address. Now, let me show you and demonstrate, after I wipe my hands off, how this distress glaze works. All right, I need a piece of paper towel. And I apply this with my finger. I just rub my finger in. It's a little bit tacky. It feels a little waxy. And all I do is I pounce it on top of my design. Just giving a very thin coating onto the envelope. And this will most definitely protect your envelope from any of the elements it may encounter. Now make sure when you do this, your ink is dry and your watercolors are dry, just so it doesn't smear. You only need to let it set just for a few seconds. I'm going to clean my fingers off. And then I'm going to gently buff the excess from the envelope. And that is all it is. That's all you have to do, and your envelope is protected from the elements. You can see a little bit of a sheen on here, a little bit of a waxy coating, but that's all you need. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this video, and you'll take a little extra time when sending cards to friends and family and bling up the envelope on the outside and even on the inside. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.